Her sudden death shocked the world. A brutal end to a glamorous life. A princess killed in a car crash under the streets of Paris. The only eyewitness vanished without trace. What really happened that night? The French government's inquiry blamed the driver. Even though the findings are flawed, this remains the official verdict. Conspiracy theories abound. Among them, Secret Service connections to two people linked to the crash were never investigated. Autopsy blood samples were tampered with. The crash was caused deliberately by a second vehicle or by a bomb. Was Diana's death an accident? We'll test the findings of the French inquiry and, using state-of-the-art technology, throw new light on a tragedy still resonant today. The news of Diana's death sent the world into mourning. From her fairy tale wedding through the rumors of adultery and a divorce that shook the monarchy, to her emergence as a strong, independent woman, the Princess of Wales was loved by the masses. And then, suddenly, late one night, in a Parisian underpass, she was gone. It was August the 31st, 1997, when the Mercedes in which she was riding smashed into a reinforced concrete pillar. Diana, along with her lover, Dodi Al-Fayed, and their driver, Henri Paul, were killed. Only Dodi's bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, survived. He has no memory of the accident. Within days, rumors began to circulate that the crash had not been an accident. Rumors that were fanned by the plethora of questions remaining unanswered. What became of the mystery car? French authorities claimed that the Mercedes had struck a white Fiat upon entering the tunnel, triggering the fatal crash. Neither the Fiat nor its driver has ever been formally identified. Why did some witnesses near the tunnel hear a loud explosion at the time of the crash? Was the Mercedes sent out of control by an explosive device? And what was the true condition of the driver, Henri Paul? Police claim he was more than 3 times over the legal driving limit. Friends, colleagues, and witnesses disagree. How fast was the Mercedes actually going when it crashed? What was the exact chain of events that led to the death of the People's Princess and the new man in her life, Dodi Al-Fayed? The fatal crash was the climax of a whirlwind romance that had begun less than 2 months earlier when Diana met Dodi, the son of wealthy businessman Mohammed Al-Fayed. The burgeoning romance sent tremors through the royal family. For the tabloids, it was a dream come true. Photographers harassed Diana and Dodi wherever they went, including Le Bourget Airport outside Paris, where they landed in a private jet at 3:15 p.m. on the 30th of August. That night, CCTV cameras recorded the couple's arrival at the Ritz Hotel, owned by Dodi's father. The paparazzi had gathered in anticipation of that front-page shot. 3 hours later, Dodi and Diana left the hotel. They used a side door to avoid photographers. Along with bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, they climbed into the Mercedes. Henri Paul, Deputy Chief of Security at the Ritz, was their driver. They were heading to Dodi's flat near the Étoile, less than 10 minutes away. Newsweek's Paris bureau chief, Christopher Dickey, was on the scene that night.
So what happened that night? How did this all unfold?
Diana and Dodi came out the back of the Ritz, got into the car on Rue Cambon, and came down here, just a couple of hundred yards from here, and then came shooting down Rue de Rivoli and stopped at this light. By then, there were already photographers starting to come around them.
Right.
This is the point at which they had to decide whether they were going to go straight up the Champs-Élysées, which would take them directly to Dodi's apartment. His apartment is just to the right of the Arc de Triomphe there. If they did that, they would have been home safe and sound probably in 10 minutes.
Well, why didn't they make that decision?
Henri Paul, the man who was driving, he wanted to ingratiate himself. He wanted to get away from the photographers. He wanted to show what he could do. So he wanted to say, I've got another route. I've got another way to go. He's driving this big Mercedes. He figures he'll put the pedal to the metal, and he'll leave everybody else wondering where they went.
Pursued by at least 7 paparazzi on motorcycles, the Mercedes turned away from the flat. It raced along the Seine towards the Place de l'Alma tunnel and a slow-moving car, a white Fiat Uno.
So the Fiat came in from here, we think. Conceivably, it was already on the road, but just over that rise,
Right down there.
just over there, bang, the Mercedes hits the Fiat, sideswipes it, piles into one of those columns right there in the middle, spins around, and somehow the Fiat, having survived, inches its way out of the tunnel and disappears. We still don't know what happened to it.
The second car has become a vital part of the mystery, a mystery made all the more intriguing by the death of the only presumed eyewitness. Paris, just past midnight on August the 31st, 1997. A car crash in a dark underpass killed 3 people, among them Diana, Princess of Wales. Only one car seems to have been in a position to witness the moment of impact and the events that led up to it. Neither that car nor its driver has been identified by French authorities. Moments after the crash occurred, Dr. Frédéric Meillet drove into the tunnel from the opposite direction. He stopped to help.
That's where I parked my car. I put on my flashing light and I went to the Mercedes to see what was happening. The car must have spun out because the car was facing the wrong way, this way. And I went almost inside the car to see. There were 4 people in the car. 2 on the other side near the wall were already dead, apparently dead. And there were 2 people on this side. And the young lady, I didn't recognize her. The young lady was was unconscious and had difficulties to breathe. And I realized just the next morning that the woman I treated was Princess Diana.
Another person near the scene was American Tom Richardson. He was outside the tunnel and heard a loud noise.
We were just walking down the John F. Kennedy Avenue, and we heard a loud explosion. And it wasn't just a little fender bender. It wasn't just a car crash. It was the explosion. It was the thunder that got my attention.
Richardson's account added fuel to nascent conspiracy theories. But in the immediate aftermath of the collision, this much was undisputed. Henri Paul and Dodi Al-Fayed were killed instantly. Diana suffered massive internal bleeding. She was taken by ambulance to a Paris hospital and pronounced dead at 4 that morning. Police investigators discovered shards of glass from a shattered taillight near the wreck. Forensic analysis revealed that it came from a Fiat Uno manufactured between 1983 and 1989. Investigating officers also found white paint scrapes on the front right of the Mercedes. The paint was consistent with that used on Fiat Unos of the same vintage. French authorities concluded that a collision between the 2 cars had sent the Mercedes into an uncontrollable skid. But not everyone was so convinced. John McNamara, an experienced detective and former chief of security for the Al-Fayed family, claims that French officials have covered up the truth.
We have been denied access to a court to test witnesses, to test the various things that we have found out, the inexplicable things that have happened.
Do the questions surrounding the crash add up to something more sinister than a tragic accident?
I like to consider myself to be a professional investigator with 26 years experience at Scotland Yard, and I am convinced that this was no simple traffic accident, and I can fully believe, well, Mr. Al-Fayed believes that his son and Princess Diana were murdered.
Unsolved History pulled together a team of experts to help unravel the truth.
That's exactly
other than...
Richard Zienicki, a specialist in vehicular accident reconstructions, will analyze the crash data.
Still behind them at this point.
Gordon Edwards, Greg Powell, and Jeff Miller will attempt to reenact the collision between the two cars. Pathologist David Posey will review the disputed autopsy report on driver Henri Paul. Acoustical consultant Jack Freitag will test whether a car crash in a tunnel could be confused with an explosion. And Daniel Martinez will lead the investigation. We start with a simple question. How fast was Diana's Mercedes going? The official finding was that the Mercedes hit the pillar at 105 kilometers or 65 miles per hour. But the damage to the car was so extensive that some argue the car was going much faster, or that a bomb was involved. At a crash test facility in the California desert, an experienced team will restage the accident using a car of comparable size and weight. They will crash it at the alleged speed to see if they can replicate the damage sustained by Diana's Mercedes.
The vehicle is going to start in the preparation room that is at the other end of the track. It's 1,000 feet away. The speed is controlled by this instrumentation here. The vehicle will leave the room and proceed or accelerate up to 63 miles an hour and hit the barrier right down below us here. We have an offset structure in front of the barrier to simulate what the vehicle that Princess Di was riding in impacted in the tunnel.
The purpose of the test is twofold. It's designed not only to determine how fast the Mercedes was traveling, but to measure the sound of such an impact. Could the explosion reported by witnesses actually have been produced by a large vehicle hitting a pillar at 105 kilometers an hour?
It wasn't so much like a collision noise like you would think. You hear metal twisting, you know, smashing. It was more like an explosion. I don't know how to explain it. It was just a big, thunderous, deep boom.
There were a number of witnesses that had reported hearing events from the tunnel. Most of them tend to say they heard a boom or two booms. I think it's worth an investigation to see whether or not things really sound like a boom, if there were a crash, or whether there was indeed something that caused a boom.
The witness reports of an explosion that night are a key factor cited by conspiracy theorists. Jack Freitag will attempt to find out whether there's any validity to the anecdotal evidence. His audio test will be in two parts. The first, recording the crash, will take place here in the desert. Then he'll play back that recording in the Paris tunnel and re-record it. Because the loudness of the impact is an unknown, he must prepare for a range of possibilities. There will be only one test crash, so he will have only one opportunity to get it right.
The biggest challenge to this recording is to make certain that we have the record in the right level. And for that reason, we're making multiple recordings.
For the test, the team is using a Pontiac Bonneville. Both its weight and size are comparable to the Mercedes in which Diana died. After 5 hours of preparation, the time has come. All the audio equipment is in place. The car's wheels are set in motion. The test car is well and truly destroyed. And remarkably, the nature of the damage and the final position of the car are extremely close to what was documented in the Parisian underpass. The driver's side is crushed, and it's evident that any passengers in the back who weren't wearing seatbelts would not have survived. The official French findings, at least in terms of the vehicle's speed upon impact, appear to be correct. What this test doesn't explain is how or why the crash took place. What actually caused Diana's car to veer out of control? And what was the role of the mysterious second car, the Fiat Uno? Was it driven by an unwitting participant? Or was it actually used as a lethal weapon? How and why did it vanish without trace? To help answer these questions, we enlisted the aid of a company that specializes in simulating car accidents using computer technology. Incorporating our California crash test results and forensic evidence from the scene, graphic experts will reconstruct the crash that led to the deaths of 3 people. The computer sequences they are building reflect the official version of events.
What we will demonstrate through the simulation is precisely what is the vehicle path, how it was moving, what speed the vehicle had during the accident. And then when we look into the animation portion of this accident, we will see realistically what happened during the night of August 31st.
Precise dimensions of the tunnel are fed into the powerful computer, as are details including the length of the skid marks, the spot where the 2 cars collided, the distance between this and the fatal car crash, as well as the speed of the cars. After a month of work, the computer simulation is complete. The Mercedes enters the tunnel at 120 kilometers an hour. It swerves to avoid the Fiat, but instead hits it with a glancing blow. Now the Mercedes is heading for the center pillars. Henri Paul tries to correct his course, but he overcompensates. Once again, he tries to regain control. But this time, it's too late. He hits the 13th pillar at 105 kilometers an hour. These were the findings of the French inquiry, that the crash was a tragic accident.
Based on the physical evidence and my reconstruction of the accident, what I can say is that driver made mistake. He was closing too fast on the vehicle.
Does this computer simulation tell the whole story? To date, investigators have been unable to locate the second car or to determine the identity of its driver. John McNamara believes that the Fiat driver could have deliberately caused the Mercedes to spin out of control.
You have a Mercedes that's done a 180-degree turn, having crashed into the 13th pillar, and yet the Fiat Uno survived everything, which suggests to me that that was a very professional driver.
Was the Fiat Uno part of a murder plot? The driver a conspirator? We asked a team of defensive driving experts to test McNamara's theory concerning the complicity of the Fiat driver. They pointed out that it's not so easy for one car to force another off the road or out of its lane, even when the cars are of similar size and weight.
There you go, good job. Get on it, there you go.
To do so effectively, the attack car would need to approach from the rear of the target, not from the front.
You don't attack a big car with a small car. Or you attack a big car with a truck. The Uno would be a terrible choice because it's less than half the size of the Mercedes.
How could you plan to do it at the entrance to that tunnel in that very precarious position? It sounds real good, but the chances of catching them right there where you have deadly lethal pillar situation is highly unlikely.
And why didn't the Fiat suffer any apparent effects from the impact? This puzzled the expert drivers.
Well, I do a lot of contact driving for a living, and I have a strong feeling that when there's any kind of contact between this large of a vehicle and a smaller vehicle, that thing is going to have to lose control.
If any small car gets hit by any big car, you would expect the small car to be sent out of control. And in a confined space like that tunnel, it should have hit something. The fact that it kept its lane and just continue to drive on its merry way doesn't seem feasible to me.
This part of McNamara's theory, that a professional driver must have been behind the wheel of the Fiat, could have some truth to it. To find out, two experienced drivers will try to recreate the collision between the two cars. At a car racing track in California, the experiment gets underway. The highly trained drivers are from a security company.
We don't want to hit today an HIT hit, which is a full contact impact. What we want is basically a grazing blow.
As with the crash test, stand-in cars will be used. In this case, a Ford Festiva for the Fiat Uno and a Lincoln Town Car for the Mercedes.
When you can't get the real thing, you just try to simulate it as closely as you can with what you've got. In terms of the physics of the actual collision, they will represent it exactly.
Cameras are placed on both cars to record the collision and its aftermath. Out on the track, pylons serve as the tunnel's pillars and walls. Critical to the scenario, but what also makes it dangerous, is the difference in speeds between the two cars. According to witnesses, the Mercedes was traveling at around 120 kilometers an hour when it entered the Alma Tunnel. The Uno had reached the tunnel's speed limit of 50 kilometers per hour. Because of the danger, a roll cage has been added to the Festiva, and the driver wears protective gear. The experiment is ready to begin.
About 3 or 4 takes, come back here for the tape change.
Okay.
It's going to be hairy.
At least 2 feet when we swerve.
The drivers soon realize that the speeds, 105 kilometers an hour for the larger car versus 50 kilometers an hour for the smaller one, are just too dangerous. They're forced to slow both cars down while keeping the differential the same.
We have to compromise. We have no any other choice because of safety and because of the physical limitation of cars and speedway.
You damn near pushed my hair over with that one. That time you swerved too soon, Gord. I think...
With a couple inches, maybe even inch, very close.
The track time allotted for the experiment will run out in 15 minutes. Will the drivers succeed before then? And if so, will their results support McNamara's theory that the Fiat was part of a murder plot? What happened in the Place de l'Alma tunnel the night Diana, Princess of Wales, Dodi Al-Fayed and their driver were killed? Many say the official findings of the French government, released 2 years after the crash, covered up the truth. We're putting some of the more controversial of those findings to the test. Here, a team of defensive driving experts is attempting to reenact the alleged collision. They're using stand-in cars of similar size and weight. A Lincoln Town Car for the Mercedes and a Ford Festiva for the Fiat Uno. Of particular interest is how the smaller vehicle would have been affected. After 2.5 hours, the two drivers finally make contact.
Oh, I hope you guys got that one on film. You guys get that? That's perfect, Gordon. That's perfect. Look at this.
The results surprise the experts.
Do you think it's possible that the driver of the Fiat never realized how much a part of the overall accident he was?
I really believe that it probably took him by surprise and he overreacted. Because as I just drove through, as he hit me, I didn't even stagger the car at all. The car kept going straight.
And you notice this is almost exactly where the streak of paint was on the Mercedes.
It seems that this is how the collision occurred. John McNamara's belief that the white car should have crashed too, had it not been driven by a professional, has been disproved.
I'm surprised because I thought that amount of hit, the damage you see on the white car versus the large car, I thought that amount of damage would send him out of the lane, either into the cones or in the Alma Tunnel into the wall. It didn't.
The experiment indicates that the driver of the Fiat Uno could have maintained control, even after being hit by Diana's Mercedes. The computer model has suggested this was possible as well. What it doesn't explain is why the driver neither stopped nor came forward to report what he'd witnessed. To this day, French authorities have not been able to track down the Fiat Uno, its owner or driver. That there was an eyewitness to the tragedy, who then allegedly vanished without trace, encourages those claiming a cover-up and a conspiracy. As do the multiple reports of an explosion resounding in the tunnel at the time of the crash.
Basically, it was just an impact. It wasn't like two cars colliding and skidding. It was just like you could tell, whatever, if it wasn't a bomb, then whatever it was came to an immediate stop.
Which brings us back to the crash test facility, where the fatal accident was reconstructed. And where acoustical engineer Jack Freitag made several recordings of the sound of the impact.
Good, channel 1 is clear, and that's our overhead mic. It sounds pretty good.
The crash registers about 100 decibels of loudness at 30 meters.
A car hitting a pillar can sound like an explosion in a reverberant environment. What we're trying to determine is whether the sound from the tunnel, if it sounded like a boom, was necessarily from an explosion of some type, or could that actually have been the crash, and it was simply the reverberant effects of the tunnel that masked out the high-frequency sounds and made it sound like a boom.
With the sounds successfully recorded, Freitag will now travel to Paris, to the scene of the accident. Here in the Place de l'Alma underpass, where the fatal crash occurred, he will play back the California recording and then re-record it, enhanced by the tunnel's acoustic properties. This is the first time that an investigative team has conducted this type of experiment at the crash site. Paris authorities have agreed to shut the tunnel for 6 hours, allowing the team to conduct their research. Curiously, on the day of the accident, the tunnel was shut down for only 4 hours, then scrubbed clean and reopened to traffic. Many say vital evidence was destroyed.
Jack, we've got all the measurements now. We're going to recreate the crash of the Uno here and then the crash of the Mercedes into the pillar down there. So what do we need to do now?
We need to wire things up right now. I think we're all set to go.
Freitag has recorded not only the test crash, but the sound of a less powerful collision to approximate the initial hit with the Fiat.
All right. Start our cable from here. All right.
Playing back the crash sounds at the correct decibel level presents the team with a problem. Local car enthusiasts step in, lending the scientists their customized boom cars with sound systems that can handle the job. Freitag places the 2 cars inside the tunnel, one near the entrance where the Mercedes is thought to have hit the Fiat, and the other at the 13th pillar, the site of the fatal crash. Once in position, Freitag's recordings will be played through these powerful speakers. The sound level is painfully loud, over 100 decibels, as loud as a 737 taking off 100 meters away. Freitag stands at the point where the Mercedes entered the tunnel, its east end. From here, he will re-record the sound of the crashes, now augmented by the acoustics of the tunnel. This should produce the exact sounds that witnesses heard at 12:28 a.m. on August the 31st, 1997.
All right, go ahead, Michel.
Even outside the tunnel, the sound of the crash reaches a level of 89 decibels.
Okay, I think we've got position 1 good. Let's move to position 2.
Next, Freitag moves to the west end of the tunnel, to where witness Tom Richardson was that night.
Okay, Daniel, go ahead.
The sound level is even higher at this end, nearly 93 decibels. With the recordings completed in the tunnel, the final step is to play them back to Richardson. First, Freitag plays the recording from the east end of the tunnel.
Troy, let's take the first one.
Yeah, that didn't sound very familiar to me. The impact and the sound was just incredible. The only way I could describe it was just it had to be like a bomb.
Now, he plays back the recording from the tunnel's west end, where Richardson was standing.
Let's play a second one then, Troy, and see if this is a little bit closer to the mark.
That's what I heard. That's way more closer to home. Absolutely. That's the impact that I heard. When you played the West End recording, it hit home. I mean, that was it. Right when it gave me goosebumps. When I heard the recording, it gave me goosebumps. That was right on the mark.
The test certainly suggests that witnesses who thought they'd heard a bomb blast were probably mistaken.
I was expecting this to work well, but not quite as well as it did work out, actually. He was absolutely unequivocal that that was a sound that he heard. I think that we've adequately demonstrated that the crash alone did count for these booms and that it was the acoustics of the tunnel that did this, not necessarily an explosion of any type.
But if a bomb can now be ruled out, what did cause the Mercedes to crash? French authorities blame driver Henri Paul. They say he was drunk, very drunk. But 4 leading pathologists have cast serious doubt on those conclusions. Two hours after the crash, police arrested 6 paparazzi who'd been pursuing the Mercedes on motorcycles and charged them with manslaughter. But 30 hours later, they pointed the finger elsewhere, at Henri Paul. Paul's friends and colleagues say the French police are mistaken.
I knew Henri Paul very well. I had known him for over 10 years, and the man was not a drinker. He was not an alcoholic, as they tried to portray him.
According to witnesses, Henri Paul had at most 2 drinks in the 2.5 hours before he took the wheel of the Mercedes. Yet the official coroner's report states that he had a blood alcohol level between 1.73 and 1.75 grams per litre, over 3 times the legal driving limit in France. Is this possible? How does a blood alcohol level that high affect a person's ability to drive? To find out, Daniel Martinez went to the University of Iowa, where he took part in an experiment on the National Advanced Driving Simulator.
Here a bit. And this is a control room where all operations occur for the simulator.
The NADS is the most sophisticated research driving simulator in the world. Developed by the American Highway Traffic Safety Administration, it consists of a car enclosed in a large dome with a computer-controlled motion system that creates a virtual environment. It's the ideal way to test the effects of alcohol on a driver without endangering the driver or other motorists.
We will be looking at your reaction time to various events that will occur in the scenario around you, so with other vehicles around you.
Before drinking any alcohol, Martinez takes a test drive in the simulator. The 3D environment includes a number of urban settings that simulate real-world conditions. Martinez drives well, but then so, apparently, did Henri Paul. After the control test, Martinez is given sufficient spirits to raise his blood alcohol level to that allegedly found in Henri Paul.
In simplistic terms, we gave him a dose of vodka with orange juice and asked him to consume it on an empty stomach at those timed intervals in order to ensure that he gets to the dosing level that we wanted to test at.
Screwdriver, right?
Yes. How are you doing after glass 1?
I'm doing fine. Right now, I'm feeling the effects of alcohol.
According to Dr. Watson, with a very high blood alcohol content, or BAC, the intoxication effect on the human body is the same, regardless of normal drinking habits.
Generally, at a given BAC, you would be equally impaired whether you're a light drinker or you're a heavy drinker. The only difference may be that if you're used to drinking, it may take a little bit more alcohol to get you to the same BAC, but generally the impairment will be the same. Don't sleep. Don't sleep. You're not allowed to sleep. I need you to drink.
Nearly 2.5 hours and 11 drinks later, Martinez reaches the same blood alcohol level as reported in the autopsy of Henri Paul.
Okay. So relaxing.
Do another test here and see where we're at. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling really very high.
Several times, he nods off.
I gotta have you sit up, buddy. We're gonna take you into the cab now.
Okay, Scott.
Finally, it's time to drive. Martinez is led to the simulator. A member of the research staff will join him and offer assistance.
There's no way in hell that I should be driving.
He has considerable difficulty focusing on the task at hand. Even though the car is an automatic, he has trouble getting it into gear.
Stay in your designate. No, put on the brake then. Shift into drive.
In drive.
Once underway, he attempts to drive at 120 kilometers an hour, the speed of the Mercedes as it entered the tunnel. The difference in his driving abilities is dramatic.
I thought Daniel was a terrific driver when he wasn't impaired. He didn't do such a great job when he was impaired. In fact, we saw very quickly that he had a hard time even getting the car in gear. He actually swerved out of his lane at some point, and inappropriately crossed the center lane to pass a vehicle and seemed to sideswipe that vehicle as well as a vehicle in the oncoming lane before moving back into his lane.
The test suggests that Henri Paul would not have been able to drive at all if his blood alcohol level had been as high as the autopsy stated. And there is other evidence that appears to contradict the official findings. These security camera images show Princess Diana, Dodi Al-Fayed, Trevor Rees-Jones, and Henri Paul just 8 minutes before the crash. They're leaving the Ritz Hotel by a side door to avoid the paparazzi swarming at the front in the Place Vendôme. Henri Paul does not appear intoxicated, certainly not as drunk as the French coroner asserted. We asked forensic pathologist Dr. David Posey to evaluate the summary of the autopsy report. First, he looked into the official claim that Paul was an habitual drinker.
In individuals who are heavy drinkers, we definitely want to examine the liver, which is right here. And one of the things we'd find in heavy drinkers is usually, unless it's cirrhotic, it's going to be enlarged. Not only will it be enlarged, but the normal red-brown color that we see at autopsy has changed. The change will have kind of a greasy yellow to yellow-orange appearance, and these are the things we look for in heavy drinkers. So in Henri Paul, none of that was present. His liver is reported to be normal size, normal consistency, no evidence of fatty change. The other issue that we have to deal with is the fact that there's no mention in Henri Paul's autopsy that there was any smell of alcohol in the stomach. If he had been a heavy drinker, would have had enough alcohol in his system to have a 0.175 milligram per deciliter level, one would expect there to be a heavy smell of the alcohol from the stomach during the course of the autopsy, and this was not recorded.
Next, Dr. Posey examined the CCTV tape from the night in question for any indication that Henri Paul was drunk.
It's now about 20 minutes after midnight on August 31st, 1997. We see Henri Paul, Trevor Rees-Jones, Princess Diana, and Dodi. Henri Paul appears from this tape to be totally sober. He appears to be able to walk with no assistance. He isn't staggering. There's no evidence that Henri Paul is drunk or under the influence of alcohol at this point. And remember, this is only a few minutes away from the fatal car accident.
There was another mysterious finding in the autopsy report. Henri Paul's blood was said to contain an extremely high level of carbon monoxide, 20.7%, enough to cause extremely erratic behavior, vomiting, and headache. None of these symptoms were observed by witnesses before the fatal crash. But if the autopsy is to be believed, where could the carbon monoxide have come from? The result of Henri Paul's autopsy revealed an abnormally high level of carbon monoxide in his blood, 20.7%, enough to cause serious and visible impairment. But nowhere within the report was there any explanation that has since held up to scrutiny. French authorities claim the carbon monoxide came from the airbags that exploded when the car crashed. But airbags produce only trace amounts of this gas, not nearly enough to explain the high levels in Paul's bloodstream. Even a heavy smoking habit wouldn't contain the concentrations cited in the autopsy report.
An average for most heavy smokers is 8%. So this leaves us with approximately 12% we have to account for on the day of the incident. The bottom line is we really do not have an explanation as to where this carbon monoxide level came from.
Yet, according to the official report, it was there. If the airbags weren't the answer, what was? Perhaps the Mercedes ventilation system malfunctioned that night, allowing exhaust fumes into the car.
If there had been carbon monoxide in the vehicle, we would have expected to have seen some changes in especially Dodi, possibly in Princess Diana.
We then tested the blood of Dodi, which we had from his clothing, and there was no trace whatsoever of carbon monoxide, which showed there'd been no carbon monoxide build-up in the car. We and the police tested his flat to see if there's any leak from the heater. It's midsummer, so it wouldn't have been switched on, but no, there was not. His Mini was tested, there was no carbon monoxide leak there whatsoever. The reality was that that was not Henri Paul's blood.
Is it possible that the blood samples were contaminated, intentionally or otherwise? Was the blood really that of Henri Paul? His family asked for a second set of samples to be taken and analysed. But those results supported the initial findings.
I would have to say that one of two things happened. One, either the samples were contaminated from the stomach contents, or there's a possibility the samples were accidentally switched. We'll never know if this was Henri Paul's blood.
Accident or conspiracy? The debate goes on.
It was not an unusual accident in my experience. Simply watching or observing data on this accident, there's nothing truly which will distinguish this accident from others other than people attached, people involved in the accident.
Others don't see it that way, and their challenges to the official report have yet to be countered.
I had been told that if I conducted any investigation whatsoever in Paris, I would be arrested and imprisoned because it would be regarded as obstructing justice.
Perhaps the key to the mystery rests with the second car, the Fiat Uno. To date, French investigators have identified neither the driver nor the car. The authorities did track down two white Fiat Unos with damage to the left rear bumper and tail light. One was owned by a Vietnamese security guard who was questioned and cleared. The other belonged to a photographer named James Anderson, a man with alleged links to MI6.
We were conducting inquiries, and we found the Fiat Uno belonging to James Anderson. That car was sold to a garage within a month of the crash.
McNamara says he has substantiated the fact that Anderson was among the paparazzi pursuing Diana and Dodi that night.
Anderson was interviewed by the police following the crash because they knew of his intense involvement in following Dodi and Diana, and he came up with the most bizarre excuse that he was not in Paris at the time of the crash.
Anderson told the police that he left his home at 3 in the morning for a flight to Corsica. He produced toll receipts as proof that he'd been nowhere near Paris at the time of the crash.
They accepted the fact that he had gone to Corsica as sufficient reason for him not being at the Alma Tunnel. That's not true. He was at the Alma Tunnel, and he boasted to people afterwards that he was there. He was there in the Fiat Uno, which caused the collision with the Mercedes that night.
Despite John McNamara's contentions, French police cleared Anderson of involvement in the fatal crash. But if he did play a role in the incident as either witness or participant, we will never know. Anderson was found dead in June of 2000.
He was found in the south of France some months later. His body burned beyond recognition. He was locked inside his own car, a BMW, and he was only identified from dental records.
Suicide or murder? Anderson's mysterious death brought a sudden halt to the search for the Fiat Uno driver. And without eyewitnesses to the fatal crash, the controversy surrounding this tragedy may never be settled. Has the truth been suppressed? 6 years on, a British inquest is finally scheduled to take place. Unless its findings dispel key mysteries, the notion of a conspiracy to kill Diana, Princess of Wales, and her lover, Dodi Al Fayed, will live on.